close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. On we'll go. Finding life along the way, melodies we haven't played. No, I don't want no rest. Echoing around these walls, fighting to create a song. I don't wanna miss a beat. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. On we'll go. Hold me close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. On we'll go.
Okay, good evening. It is time for some more of the Cloven Tree by Chris Holmquist. It is available on Amazon, and I think he has another website. It's like thecloventree.com or something. I don't know. I got it off of Amazon, or it was gotten off of Amazon for me. So, but we are on to chapter 5 tonight. It is 18 pages, so not too bad. We'll just jump straight on into it here. Excuse me. Chapter 5, The Souls of Men. The fens lay at the western end of the splitting sea that divided the northwest continent from its southern neighbor. They followed the shore of the sea south from the city of Beech Grove all the way into the southern continent, eventually giving way to its great northern jungle. Until well into the south continent, the fens were a wasteland, a wet desert, for drinkable water was very rare. Each of them was the quartering spine, the western straight range, the north-south running range of mountains. This divided the northern continent into the eastern and western halves. West of this range, the High King and the true Iron King ruled men. East of it, men followed the pretenders, the false Iron Kings, and the other petty Banes. These rival warlords were satraps of the Bane Lord whose name is not spoken. Fentown was founded less than 111 leagues, 400 miles, south of Beech Grove, and so well into the northern half of the fens. It was the southern extent of the High King's influence, and earlier of the Iron Kings after the splitting sea had been made and the ancient land lost. They took nearly 10 days to reach Marshburg, a community that, while younger than its southern neighbor, had first been successful at eliminating the fenworms in its vicinity. Now a trade town, it became a secure settlement from which to start farming. This had led to more settlement and eventually to the rechartering of Fentown 30 years before, this time successfully. Excuse me. The journey could be made in a shorter time, but the captain would not divide his men, nor run a forced march unless necessary. Most of all, he did not want to risk his pack animals, now that they were so heavily laden with decades' worth of worm hides. A full member of the King's Guard, he knew how precious the cargo was. 4 days from Fentown, they started coming to the Demesnes. I don't know what. I think it might be a typo. Of coming to the somethings of, as the Fenlanders put it, the local lords. Mostly thanes, ensigns, and esquires, though about a tenth of the masters of these minor holdings were full-fledged noblemen. They were the final offshoots of Marshburg, the men who wanted their own land, who felt that the distance from the untamed swamps was enough to risk raising crops. Many of the buildings were upon terraces, oddly shaped and structured so that the top of the terrace was actually wider than the bottom. Entire fields were like this as well. Hearing the prince comment upon it, Owen explained. "Snakes, your highness," he said. "The reverse sloping is harder for a snake to get past. The terraces are made to support the outer edges from within. Their shade draws the snake to the highest point of the terrace base, which is furthest from the upper edge. The snake has to pretty much be upside down to reach the top. Good place to find them when you want them, too." "So the snakes are not always killed on sight?" "No, sir, your highness," Owen said. Snakes are the best rodent killers made by the gods. The founder. The gods came later. Owen shrugged. At any rate, some of the terraces are used to raise snakes, keep them safe from predators while they're young. Some of them have their venom milked to make, what's that word? I always call it counter poison, and Gowan gets mad at me. Anti-venom, the prince supplied. This reminded him of a question, but he let Owen continue for a moment. Thanks, but most of the snakes are raised to kill snakes. How is that? The prince said, needing more information to appreciate the concept. Snakes eat snakes too, and I can think of nearly a dozen venomless ones that love to eat their cousins. The prince forgive me... Oh, the prince, forgive me, highness, but that's the creature's name, is very valuable because it can't be poisoned, and it loves venomous snakes. He nodded and changed the subject. Why is it that the younger people of Fentown tend to more educated speech? I noticed that before, the prince asked before he forgot again. Most of that comes from Mr. Taurus. He spent much of his time refining our tactics, though he did say that my father... Owen halted, embarrassed at the word, but the prince laughed. I have been known to still call my father Dad, Owen. Some things are beyond grammar. Thanks. He said Dad's skill didn't need much refining. He started teaching the younger hunters, myself among them, and he didn't stop at tactics. Oh, we're in an ad. I know not everybody sees the ads, but I will just sit and wait until the ad is done. It's only another 40 seconds, so we'll while away the time. Some of his dialogue is a little bit tough to read. That's why I'm kind of haltingly going through it, because I'm trying to make sense of it as I go, because this is the first time I've read this book, so I'm trying to understand it and follow the story as I go. And so it makes me hesitate. Well, anyway, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so we're back. The ad is over. So where were we? He didn't stop at tactics. He began teaching us some of the dragon's tongues, including the persons, tenses, and cases that are used when people speak to worms using non-drake tongues. Bad speech can kill them. My brothers are better at those lessons than I am. Your elders didn't mind that he taught more than hunting skills? No, Owen shook his head. That way we weren't speaking the way the orcs did, the speech that embarrasses the chief so much. The rest of the elders are just as uncomfortable about it. The prince found Owen to be an interesting companion. The pace of the journey allowed him to delve the mind of this provincial subject, an opportunity too rare to be missed. In the days that followed, the prince asked dozens of questions of Owen, from the nature of the Macoan crossbow to the interaction between the town proper, the mines, and the fisheries 3 days west of the village. Owen, raised to be independent and self-sufficient, almost always had an answer. In this way, the next High King learned much about common people, who it was easy to think of as simple. There's another typo there. There's no 2 there, but there should be. The bridging of manners of speech opened the prince's mind to an obvious and thus radical concept. People all over Angia spoke the way these people did, different dialects notwithstanding. Those people were no more stupid than these, or him for that matter. They only had a different kind of education. Owen learned no less than the prince. Finding gaps in the fen hunter's knowledge, the prince answered what questions he could. then turned Owen loose upon the wizards, lore masters, and the only members of the party who had no other duties. They didn't mind their sudden pupil, believing that teaching proves understanding. Excuse me. What's the difference between a troll, a golem, and a ghoul? Owen asked. Trolls are the most intelligent of these classes. They have language and crafting skills. Ghouls are less intelligent. They have little skill, almost no language, and fear very little except fire and deep or troubled water. Golems fear nothing. Some of the learned say they are not truly alive, since mostly they die when their mage dies or stops their weirding. Golems can't reproduce. Ghouls are usually thought not to reproduce. Trolls definitely procreate. Some even have called them liches and wights. Excuse me. Okay. Don't trouble him with irrelevancies, Master Arnest said, and another opportunity was missed. How many fenworms have you seen? How many kinds, Owen? Owen soon found that the wizards were an inexhaustible source of information, so much so that he had to put aside some questions, as their lectures went right past them. But his questions, or their lectures, what? Owen found that the wizards were an inexhaustible source of information, so much so that he had to put aside some questions, as their lectures went right past them, but his questions, or their lectures, he wanted to learn. That's a bad sentence. Taurus had honed his love of learning into a merciless fanaticism. Devour knowledge. When your life depends on it, knowing too much is impossible. That I agree. Mentally thanking his teacher for that maxim, Owen asked questions constantly of the mages, the prince, and the soldiers, even Taurus and his father. The information those two had startled... What? The information those two had startled him. Oh, okay. Until he realized that he had asked them about little more than drakes, worms, and fens. He was voracious, never fearing to re-ask something if he did not understand it fully. There was much to learn, and the mages were sometimes easily sidetracked. For instance, now the legionnaires are perhaps the deadliest of the Banelord's servant, Aldemar said. I've heard of them, but, Owen began. Another mage interrupted. Piffle, my friend, Arnest rebutted. They are deadly to be sure in the right circumstances, but I believe werefels are a more formidable form of manwight. Werefels? There is reason to believe they are not even truly bondsmen. Perhaps they are not even wights at all, nor lichmen. What? Of course they are. They fear fire. But reliable reports have them breeding. The Avampirs breed, and they still suffered the same condition as the bondsmen. So you suppose, the one said to the other, and this went on for about 10 minutes, and Owen was completely lost as they argued what aspects of what were wherefore. Owen became totally confused, and they never mentioned the word undead. Finally, Owen butted back in at a small but relevant point. You say those people probably won't be involved? No, Owen, not where we're going. Orcs and trolls will probably be the only enemies in the garrison. They can be they can we then bleh, I was seeing it weird. Then can we concentrate upon them? My head's swimming with what you said, and you arguing each other don't help. The mages became abashed and went on teaching. Owen was never so lost again in his lessons, but another opportunity was missed. Some of the soldiers became irritated, but no one discouraged him. His education had been startlingly narrow. Orcs, elves, trolls, ogres, whatever ancient creature might have been, Owen heard of it. Owen had heard of them a little, but he was too often nearly overwhelmed to seek specifics for everything, especially since half of the time they spoke of creatures long extinct. Ordhawks, minotaurs, Velnurs, Wilbs. The tale was not entirely vile. He also heard of the elder races, several dozen clans of the giants, the Uncor, the Senetri, the Phoenicians, and others, most now also extinct. Aside from the other elder races, they spoke of the great and ancient kings of men. Brian the Pinnacle, who Owen had known as Brijan, mightiest of the Iron Kings, William the Great, Iron King at the Battle of the Lakes, Oliver Wintherian, first of the High Kings, and they spoke of the Lich King. But after a week of constant history, Owen needed a break, and for a bit he asked more immediate questions. Highness, how is it that this northern section of the marshland is so fruitful? The prince snorted. I doubt that the local lords would call them that. They do, however, produce more than many farms in the Wintherian, he said, referring to the Midlands named after his forefather. The lords here are much more organized than the ones to the south. They have spent a great deal of effort to form a reliable irrigation system. This system includes leveled land, ditches, canals, and reservoirs to regulate the flow of water. The system is far from perfect, however. They have to fight a constant battle against salt deposits. He pointed to a fallow section of land. It was glittering white, like a giant, nearly square bone. That field will be abandoned for centuries before the salt has diminished enough to make it usable. Looking at the dead field, Owen shook his head. I thought that was chalk. Inevitably, though, Owen went back to the mages for more history. They were glad of the audience, and Owen, despite many moments of being inundated, was an avid listener. He had been taught to read, but books were few in the fens, and for the moment he was more comfortable with lecture. By the last 2 days of the journey, Owen had a decent grasp of the history of Angea, though its geography was still a bit beyond his comprehension. So, Master Aldemar, if I understand it right, Owen said, the morning they were to reach Marshburg, the Bane Lord caused the uprising at the beginning of the First Age, overthrowing the life wardens that guarded the world. He'd made all kinds of creatures, most of whom were killed off over the next 3 ages, but they kept men from receiving the birthright, the gift that the elders had prepared. More than half of the elders have died or gone into hiding. At the beginning, men were united against the Bane Lord, but when Brijan was lost, our power was broken. Very good. That is accurate so far, Aldemar said. Thanks, Owen said. We've never been united since. It was the Azani who took over, particularly the Myriad. He spoke at length, going through the 5 ages, summarizing scores of millennia in just minutes. Proving the Death Wardens were still neutral, the other Iron King lines, now servants of the Bane Lord, were killed off. Wintherian became the High King, and so today there is a High King and an Iron King in the 5th Age. Yes, that is a concise, if not very detailed, summary of the history of Angea, Arnest said. Remember, Owen, Aldemar clarified, these events occurred over tens of thousands of years. Where did the Glee Sages fit into that again? Owen asked. Startled, the mages began explaining the First Age in more detail. Marshburg was larger than he had remembered, but Owen realized that he had last been here just before they found the dragon cub. The whole town was about 10 square miles, and it was completely walled. The south gate was open before them. As they rode to it, Owen saw the remnants of great scratches in the stone next to the gate, though though mostly years, perhaps decades old, the scratches told why no one lived immediately around the city. As they came through the south gate, an old soldier leading a party of soldiers met them. He dismounted, saluted, and then helped the prince dismount. "The over-captain of the Grand Regiment," Bruin whispered to Owen. Okay. The general spoke. "Highness, your messenger arrived and gave me the orders to stand down from relocating the southern villagers. I presume that something has changed your mind." "The people between here and the village of Fentown had nothing but praise for their efforts," the prince said, "and while I was there, I saw them successfully conduct a very difficult rescue operation. They also had a wealth of hides that they sold to me directly for a song. They may keep their village, for now at least." This statement startled Owen, but Bruin whispered to him, "The prince has promised your village's continuity in the presence of dwarves and mages. The over-captain's family is much involved. With some of the hide merchants. While honorable, his perspective is somewhat slanted by this. The prince will not betray his word to your village." Coming from a dwarf, this statement reassured Owen. "Then the journey went well, my lord?" "Completely, General. Uneventful on both legs of it, and I saw the Fenlanders perform their work very skillfully. They also thought that their wardship had expired some time ago. Their village reflects this miscommunication. Regardless, they have become quite proficient at hunting and killing fen golems. They have actually thinned that population noticeably. That has affected their hunting of the worms." The general was impressed by the words "thinned" and "noticeably," a goal very hard to obtain. "Understandably, my prince," the general noted, a hint of respect actually entering his voice. "Rot trolls are more like a recurring illness. I left a company down there to coordinate the next hide purchase and to study their hunting. We also brought 3 of the villagers as auxiliaries. I believe that the 12th Scout Platoon needs more men. Could you have them sent there?" "Certainly, my lord." He turned to an aide. "Lieutenant, take the recruits to the city's 12th crossroads and the hostelry there." "Very good, sir. Recruits, come with me. Bring your gear." "That is you and your villagers, Owen," Bruin whispered again. "Go with them. Take your horse." The lieutenant, still new to Marshburg, led them up several streets and around a dozen or so corners, finally coming to a plain, ramshackle-looking, but well-built, drab building that Owen at first mistook for a warehouse. Approaching it, the lieutenant called for the inn's stable hands and the platoon's sergeant-at-arms. The grumpiest-looking old man that Owen had ever seen responded. He walked with a limp, and the wrinkles on his face seemed to be extensions of the frown that undoubtedly was a permanent fixture on his face. He looked as if he viewed the world with a permanent cross between a scowl and a squint. "Who's shouting for me, and what do you want?" "What do you want, sir?" the lieutenant corrected. "Don't you know a commissioned officer when you see one, sergeant?" "Ah, it's you, Lieutenant," the old sergeant said with an almost casual air, as if he knew he was beyond reproach. His salute, however, was precise and perfect. "I got more time in service than you've got sucking at your mother's bosom, and I'll have you know—" "Yes, you were a brevet high captain for 15 months over 30 years ago. You've told me that before." 18 months, Lieutenant, 18 months. "Now, what do you have here? New recruits? Well, come on. I don't got all day. Come on in and we'll have you sign the roster." They followed him into the small room off the stables, a farrier's old storeroom, Owen thought, and began to sign the book that he indicated. "A bit old, ain't they?" he noted professionally as they signed the roster. "Strong looking, though. The prince may recruit whomever he wishes, whether they come from Great Oliver's ghost, the sergeant suddenly blurted, startling Owen as he was signing the roll book. Can't you write smaller than that, boy? Something about his face made Owen think the man was covering up his exclamation. You're taking up half the roster. You made me interrupt an officer, too. You may have had life easy down there in the fens, but you're in the service now, and that means you'll be doing a man's work. Shaking his head, muttering something about if the sergeant were not so good with the troops, the lieutenant started walking away as the sergeant's chastisement moved from disdain into eloquent vulgarity, and the stable hands decided to disappear. Not stopping his verbal offensive, the sergeant moved around the recruits to the door. Still cursing, he made sure that the yard was empty as he shut it, his tirade stopping when it closed. A genuine smile burst forth on his face, and suddenly he did not look grumpy at all. Oxbow! Owen Oxbow! Damn if I ain't glad and surprised to see ye. I thought we were in for an interesting job, but I didn't know they'd bring you in on it. He seized Owen's father in a bear hug. Returning the embrace, Oxbow said, I thought you'd forgotten me, Curtis. Curtis's scoff crushed the notion that like an avalanche, smashing a weed. I remember you better'n I remember my first love. Every boy'll have a first girl he kisses, but not every man gets his life saved. That's like being born all over without having to wait to grow up. The rest of the scouts are in proper. You shouldn't have to worry too much about any more window dressing, he said, referring to his tirade. The rest of the platoon knows that we've got a special mission, and I'm sorry I shouted at you, young'un. Didn't have anything better to hide me surprise. Curtis's directions led them to the inn's common room. The proprietor looked at them and said, This hostel's reserved for the 12th Scout Platoon. We are to join the platoon, my good man. Where are they? Taurus asked. The innkeeper looked dubiously at them, then shrugged. Thinking that the soldiers could handle them if they didn't actually belong there, he led them down a somewhat disused corridor to a banquet hall with double doors. Despite its being his inn, he knocked. Enter, inn man, a voice called through the door. How much more have we got? About 8 pages. Yeah. Okay. True to Andoran's word, nearly 40 elves, men, and dwarves were waiting for them. They were looking at maps, checking gear, and sharpening blades, whether arrow point, knife, sword, or axe. The dwarves in particular were inspecting gear, or had been until the 4 people entered the room. As they looked at the Fenlanders, Owen stared at the dwarves. The soldiers here didn't look much different than those he'd arrived here with, nor did the elves, but these dwarves by themselves each looked to have more metal than all of Fentown. Each of their swords was nearly an inch thick. Each dwarf was wearing leather, then chain, then plate, solid jointed plate. He could see their kits laid out as they inspected them, and each dwarf was in a different state of dress, giving each layer of their armor, from leather to plate, a thorough inspect both before and after donning it. Owen couldn't help himself. He went to one of the dwarves' plate armor and picked up the entire suit of it as it lay upon a blanket, and grunted. It was at least as heavy as he was, but he remembered Master Bruin saying, At need a dwarf can carry over 5 times his weight, and dwarven warriors often clothe themselves in hundredweights of steel. We draw strength from metal. It is one of our magics. Owen had not quite grasped dwarven metal mastery before, but now it began to dawn on him, and he was glad he was not an enemy to these short-bearded warriors. These fellows say they belong with you, master, the proprietor said, as one of the dwarves returned to their inspections, as most of the dwarves returned to their inspections. Excellent, housemaster. I have been expecting them. Hast thou begun preparing our dinner? The elf's voice was masked somehow. It's cookin' now, Master Elf. Excellent. Thou hast my thanks. The innkeeper left, and the elf looked up, casting back his hood. Well met, Taurus. The fens hath not been unkind to thee, I note. His voice rang clearly now, and Owen saw Mr. Taurus's eyes widen. Lelibrin, I did not realize that you would be captaining the mission. His Highness said nothing of you. Neither did Andoran. They are wise beyond their mortal years. Wouldst thou have come if thou hadst known? Taurus left that unanswered, save for a grunt. These are my fellow hunters and villagers, Captain Owen Oxbow McOwen, and his son, Owen McOwen, Oxbow's son. The best worm hunter in all Fentown. He saw the vision. Lelibran studied them quickly for a moment, his face expressionless. Join us. Come to the table, everyone. Each member of the platoon not present hath been briefed. These are our goals, the Killian Castle and the Dragon Lair of Krolth. He explained the mission and plans in detail over the next hour. Somehow none of them disbelieved it. Despite the book's age, though one soldier... The book? What book? Okay. Despite the book's age, though one soldier, a career sergeant named Wilmer, grumbled under his breath about legends coming to life, Lelibran wrapped up the briefing. We believe if they harness this tome, our foes will use it to make more servants, possibly even a new race of enemies. The vision leads us to believe that they will try to make more legions. Worse, they might finally succeed in breeding flesh demons with dragons. Several of the soldiers whistled or cursed. Then one of the human wizards spoke up. Lars Wellman. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, Owen said. How could a book cause so much trouble? I know enough of wizards to know nothing they have wrote's worth all this going about. Taurus slapped him lightly on the arm. Nothing they have written, he corrected. With a slightly disapproving look. Sighing, one of the mages spoke, also surnamed Wilmer. He was no relation to the sergeant. Spell books are mostly a myth, young McOwen, in that you are correct. They are usually just a collection of hints and pronunciations that a mage discovers. A few have very powerful, complete weirds that no one else knows. Mostly they are just mental exercises that increase focus. This book, however, is certainly powerful, as the myths containing word phrases, grammatically perfect pronunciations, from that time when the souls of men could learn and know all of the laws of power, and the language humanity that is, used to invoke them. This tongue, the unified human tongue, the tongue of knowledge, you may call it virtually anything, and you cannot overstate its importance. The Glee sages wielded a power that is beyond comprehension, of which the arts and abilities of modern magi are but shadows, because of this language. The Glee sages disappeared. The Bane Lord worked unendingly to have the human lifetime, to hinder the abilities of our souls, the power of our souls, and he succeeded. The language is lost. We don't even remember the name of this language of the soul. But we are changing again. The kings are strong once more. The Bane Lord is still recovering from the defeat by the unnamed mage, and now we have the vision to guide us, so we think the time of our weakened soul might be ending. Ending? Owen asked. But the Battle of the Lake. Lelibran interrupted. Young McOwen, it was at the battle of the lake that the decline of thy race started to be reversed. Man hath barely begun his recovery. Yes, Mage Wilmer concurred, our souls are still but shadows of what they were. You talk about the power of the human soul, Owen said. I've never heard our mages say anything about that back home. Lelibrin interrupted. Surely thou hast heard of Oli. Owen shook his head. I think the mages with the prince mentioned him, but we don't talk of history back home. Too many of us don't want to remember what the orcs did to our folks, and our folks didn't learn no history as slaves. Yet what of hearth tales? Lelibrin asked. Legends, even distorted ones, shall instruct thee upon the power of the ancient mages. Oli, Arbeck, Tatarma, Kinsmer, Versnish, Amabak. All of those are questions. Owen shook his head again, but Taras spoke. You've heard of the last one, Owen, for I told you of him myself before your mothers told me not to tell you such tales, though I called him by his earned name, his nom de guerre, the wizard chief Taliesin. Owen's eyes lit up, and his mouth dropped open. The fire-eyed? Did he really earn the name fire-eyed by staring into the eyes of the fire basilisk and not burning up? Did he really stare so hard that the fire basilisk, no, every fire basilisk burst into flames? Their entire race? He crushed an entire army of kobolds with a hailstorm? Is that true? Did he trick each of 10,000 minotaurs into believing he was the king of the minotaurs, so they fought until they were all killed? Did he actually entrance a dragon to walk into a volcano? Lelibrin held up his hand to cut off Owen's childlike wonder, and he smiled. Yeah, Owen, those tales but little beeth. I guess that's supposed to be beeth, but little exaggerated. Some perhaps doth be understated. That doth show the power of the unlimited soul that is instructed by the lost tongue of this tome, of this book of sages. Owen was shocked. Well, we should go get it then. You sound as if it were easy, a human mage said. His name was Lars Wellman, and had quickly formed an unflattering opinion of Owen. This is not a story, boy. Several of the soldiers looked as if he'd said what they wanted to. I don't know how old you are, Mage, or your name, but you're not old enough to call me boy. Call me Owen, or Beau's son, or McOwen. Call me boy again, and I'll prove you ain't old enough, though you'll feel old enough when I'm done. I know the sight, sound, nesting, track, and dung signs of every reptile in the marshlands near enough, and I know how to make over 20 kinds of arrows. I made these crossbows I carry, and I know more about venoms than you could. I've been bitten more times than you're old, unless you're 200, which you ain't. I've killed over 50 fenworms, and can work steel. Maybe I'm more suited for this than you. This'll mean more than fooling some jackass into thinking you've cured his headache. Owen hated condescending people, probably because his father always seemed to talk that way to him. Okay. Wellman bristled, that common professional insult angering him more than most. He would have responded, but the chief dwarf in the group spoke. You've done well in your own minds, lad, and I can call you that if I am 200. This, though, is as I am 200. This, though, is a new tunnel you're digging, in different stone. You said you were good with steel? No, I said I can work it. I wouldn't say I'm good at it, not to a dwarf. What would you do with this, then? He said, tossing a sheathed longsword to Owen. He caught it and gauged its weight by feel. 15 pounds. That's a heavy sword. I could make over 400 nails with this. The dwarf named Brander smiled. You have a definite feel for it. Some skill would follow from that, of course, but what can you do with the blade? Show us your sword skill. I don't know how to use a sword. Swords are useless in the fens, he said, sighing because he knew they wouldn't understand. Shock silenced the banquet room as Owen pronounced this. Brander was thinking of what Owen said, trying to appreciate it, but the men in the hall, soldiers and mages alike, laughed dismissively, as if Owen had just said that fire, the wheel, or breathing had no use, proving himself an idiot. Oxbow stepped forward to justify what his son had said, but Tara stopped him with a hand upon his arm and nodded at Owen. Let him show them. Forgive me, Master Dwarf, Owen said. Then holding the sword by the hilt and the scabbard point, he held it out in front of him and began to flex his muscles. At first nothing happened, but slowly the blade bent, and bent as Owen inexorably compelled the iron. When he was done, his arms were crossed in front of his chest. The sword was straight, but with a tight knot in the center, as he had bent the sword until blade and tip had reversed direction. This must be dwarf iron to not break. Now for the hard part. Without reversing his grip, he flexed his muscles again and slowly began undoing what he had just done, until the sword looked as if it had been as it had when Owen first grabbed it. Looking critically at the blade, Owen spent a moment tweaking it. Nodding in satisfaction, he pulled it from the sheath with barely a whisper. Resheathing it, he tossed to the Wellman. You draw it. The sword came free as easily, as silently as it had for Owen. No matter what stories you've heard, mage, you don't kill dragons with a sword, even a dwarf sword. Now, young McOwen, you don't need to be doing that to Master Brander's swords, Curtis said. He entered the banquet hall with the prince and the lords, mages, and elves that had journeyed to Fentown. Any of Oxbow's kin's welcome company in Nakilia, Curtis added. The prince spoke next. I think we're almost done. Yeah, we are. The prince spoke next. My apologies for coming in so late, but the general had much to report. I'd have knocked, but couldn't disturb such an interesting conversation. Also, it was a good reminder that locks can be opened by more than keys. He walked to the table that the innkeeper had set drinks upon earlier, and selecting the coolest pitcher, poured some juice. He sat on a bench as he drank. You told them already? He asked, taking a drink, as Lelibrin nodded. Curtis reclosed and locked the doors. You're still certain of your interpretation of the vision? I am, Highness, the elf replied. If our enemies can harness this power, there may be no limit to their gain. The prince nodded grimly. My aides, Lord Thames Rick and Therion Flandrena, will join you. Lelibrin raised an eyebrow at the names, but said nothing. Also, Mages Aldemar and Arnest wish to accompany you. If I recall the number of this scout platoon correctly, that should bring your total command to 46 in strength, with 10 at least wizards, not counting battle mages, Lilibrin noted, and the combined skill of the two young lords doth more than compensate for the younger McOwen's lack of swordsmanship. Very good, Highness. Wellman felt compelled to interrupt at that point. 15 less experienced members of the scout platoon's original complement had been reassigned temporarily so as to keep the size of the platoon manageable, and none of them, Wellman concluded, were very happy about it, including this unproven, untrained man at the last moment was something he could not bear without comment. Highness, is it lawful for a neophyte to accompany us upon such a mission? The man is strong, but he has no skills for this. He saw the vision, the prince responded, and while he does not know how to use a sword, none of us did until taught. That shall be your job. he said, pointing to the soldiers of the platoon, his tone making it more than an order, to teach him what he needs to learn. Now, nor would I call him unskilled, Mage Wellman. He knows how to use a weapon. I personally can attest to that. Having seen him kill with axe, bow, and hammer, he has great strength. Those crossbows of his are as strong as dwarf-made troll ballistae. Finally, he has great endurance and can carry a wounded comrade several miles in rough terrain. That alone qualifies him. The soldiers looked at Owen appraisingly, particularly Sergeant Wilmer. He had often used battlefield medicine. "Am I forgetting anything?" the prince asked Aldemar and Arnest. "The whom he rescued, your highness," Aldemar replied. "Ah, thank you. Owen McOwen, on the very day that we arrived in Fentown, single-handedly saved Taurus Longreach from a fenworm in the marshes. This neophyte killed a half-dragon, saving a master dragoneer's life." The soldiers were astonished. Many looked at the prince. Some looked at Owen, trying to see him killing a beast that was about to kill a master dragoneer. The rest looked to Taurus to see if he could give a confirming sign. The elves all nodded, in their long lifetimes having seen stranger things, and the 10 dwarves also did not seem to think it odd. The men, however, were stunned, except those who had just come from the fens, plus Curtis, who thought that Owen was much like his father. The more veteran commandos were the first to recover, mages and sergeants alike. They bowed one by one to the prince's affirmation of Owen's admittance into their company. Lars Wellman was the last. Not until Taurus finally gave a nod of confirmation did he overcome his surprise. Then turning, he too bowed to the prince. And that is the end of that chapter. So not a very eventful one. Just a whole lot of talking and history, which is fine. That's totally fine. The next one, Chapter 6, is Commando Aborning. An odd title. I don't know. I hope it'll be explained to us what it means. And we'll see. How long is this chapter going to be? I'm going to guess it's going to be about 15, 16 pages again. So, no, it's 20 pages. So it's a long chapter. We'll get into it next week. All right. So, who's around? Anybody? We just raided Mr. Blitzer last night, so I'm not going to raid him again. I like to, spread it around. I just heard from Ren Flames today he's going to be taking a break from raiding, or from streaming, for personal reasons. He's only got one person watching him right now. Let's go on over there and see what he's talking about. It looks he's got words on stream as his category. So we'll go over there and see what he's talking about. Oh, and it's not showing him to me. I'll have to do a search for him. Ren Flames. There he is. Head on over there. I know there's only 2 of us, but better than nothing. And I will see you all over there.
Don't like the lights, but it's camera time. Said take a picture, but you rolled your eyes. Now I'm mortified.